So you found this channel, Classified Culture. Thank you for joining today wherever you may be. This site is dedicated to creating content for anyone who enjoys listening to narrated horror stories. If you are enjoying the channel and the stories told, please take a moment to like this video, leave a message in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel. With that being said, it's time to let me guide your imagination through another dark and twisted tale. Alex stepped into the apartment, his boots echoing on the bare floorboards. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing off the dim light from the hallway. He stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of something rotten, like old fruit left too long in the sun. He switched on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The place was sparsely furnished. A couch with its stuffing erupting from tears in the fabric, a small table with a single chair tucked beneath it, and a bookshelf sagging under the weight of yellowed tomes. Cobwebs draped everything like grimy lace. His breath misted in the cold, his heartbeat echoing loudly in his ears. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the creeping unease. This was just another story, another chance to prove he still had what it took. He could almost taste the Pulitzer Prize nomination now. He moved deeper into the apartment, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet like ancient bones. The kitchen was off to his left, a relic of outdated design with peeling wallpaper and rusted pipes. He shone his light into the dark corners, revealing nothing but shadows and more dust. To his right was a bedroom, or what had once been one. Now it was little more than a storage room for forgotten memories. An old steamer trunk overflowing with faded letters, a music box that played no tune when wound, and a mirror propped against the wall, its glass cracked like a spider's web. Alex approached the mirror, his reflection staring back at him through the fractured image. He reached out, running a finger along the cold edge of the frame. As he did, something caught his eye, a faint inscription etched into the wood just below the surface. He leaned in closer to read it. "Mirror, mirror." His voice faded as he realized what was written there. A chill ran down his spine, and not from the cold this time. "Mirror, mirror," he whispered again, his breath fogging up the glass. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the apartment, a low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Alex's heart hammered in his chest as he whirled around, sweeping his flashlight across the room. Nothing moved except the dust motes dancing in the beam of light. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. This was just an old building playing tricks on him, that's all. There was no such thing as whatever it was he thought he'd heard. He turned back towards the mirror, his reflection watching him with eyes that seemed too dark even in the dim light. As he watched, something shifted in those reflected eyes. They widened slightly, and then, just for a moment, they seemed to look past him, into the room behind him. Alex's blood ran cold as he realized what that meant. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around again. The room was empty, except for the furniture he'd already seen. Nothing moved except more dust motes caught in the beam of his flashlight. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from those dark corners, waiting for him to let his guard down. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself once again. This was ridiculous. He was letting his imagination run wild like some scared child telling ghost stories at a sleepover. He was Alex Hartley, award-winning documentarian, not some frightened little boy. But even as he told himself that, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread coiling in his stomach like a serpent waiting to strike. He needed to keep moving, to find out more about this place and the people who'd lived here. That was what he was good at, uncovering the truth no matter how deeply it lay buried. With renewed determination, Alex left the bedroom behind, heading deeper into the apartment. The hallway stretched out before him like a dark maw leading into the heart of some ancient beast. He took another deep breath and stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the gloom as he moved further from the light, further from safety. As he walked, he noticed something odd about the walls. They seemed to be lined with photographs. Yes, that was it. Hundreds upon hundreds of black and white images, each one tucked into a simple wooden frame. He reached out, running his fingers along the cold glass, protecting one particularly intriguing photograph. An image of a young woman laughing as she danced alone in what appeared to be this very apartment. But there was something wrong with the picture, something that made Alex's stomach churn even as he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He leaned closer, squinting at the image, trying to figure out what felt so off. Suddenly, a noise echoed down the hallway behind him. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable. Alex froze, his heart pounding in his ears like a drum roll heralding some awful performance. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just behind him. Alex stood there, frozen, unable to move or breathe or think. Then, slowly, agonizingly so, he turned around. There was nothing there except the empty hallway and the shadows dancing on the walls. But as he watched, one of those shadows seemed to detach itself from the others, growing darker and more distinct, until it took on a familiar shape, that of a person standing just out of reach of his flashlight's beam. Alex's breath caught in his throat as the figure took a step forward. It was a woman, her dress tattered and faded like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Her hair hung lank around her shoulders, obscuring her face completely. As she stepped into the light, Alex saw that her eyes were missing, just empty sockets staring out at him from behind that curtain of hair. And then he realized what had been wrong with the photograph earlier. It hadn't been the woman laughing, but rather something lurking just beyond the frame, hidden by shadows. The creature, because there was no other word for it, took another step towards Alex, its mouth opening wide as if to speak. But instead of words, a low growl rumbled deep in its throat, growing louder and more insistent until it filled the hallway like thunder. Alex stumbled backwards, his heart pounding wildly now. This couldn't be happening. He was Alex Hartley, rational man of science, not some frightened child seeing monsters under his bed. And yet here he was, backing away from a creature that shouldn't exist while every primal instinct screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go except deeper into the apartment's heart, deeper into its darkness. So instead, Alex did what any good documentarian would do. He stood his ground and raised his camera, capturing the creature on film even as it advanced towards him. The flash went off, blinding them both momentarily. When Alex's vision cleared, he saw that the creature had stopped, its head cocked to one side, as if listening for something only it could hear. Then, slowly, it turned away from Alex and began to walk back down the hallway, disappearing into the shadows once more. Alex let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he lowered the camera. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered like an unpleasant taste in the mouth. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, trying to convince himself that it had been a trick of the light, a hallucination born from stress and exhaustion. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't true. He had seen something impossible, something terrifyingly real. And now he was trapped here with it, alone, except for the ghosts of his past and the echo of that low growl reverberating through the empty halls. He turned back to the bedroom, eager to leave this haunted hallway behind. But as he stepped inside, he felt a sudden disorientation, like stepping off a cliff into a void. The room spun around him briefly before snapping back into focus, leaving him swaying on his feet and gripping the doorframe for support. What was happening? Was it just dizziness from shock and fear, or something more sinister at work here? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. This wasn't the time for paranoia. He needed to keep moving, find some way out of this godforsaken place. But when he looked up, he realized that something had changed in the room while he'd been gone. The heavy dust on the floor seemed thicker now, as if it had grown overnight despite being undisturbed mere moments ago. And there were marks in it, long, dragging lines leading from the bed to the window, where they disappeared into the shadows. Alex approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. As he reached the window, he saw that one of the panes was cracked, jagged shards glinting ominously in the light. And there were more lines here too, leading up from the ground to end at roughly eye level, as if something had been staring out into the night. He leaned closer, trying to peer through the broken glass despite his instinct screaming at him not to touch it. That's when he noticed the figure reflected back at him wasn't quite right. It seemed distorted somehow, stretched thin like taffy pulled too tight, and those eyes, they were completely black, pupil and iris merged into one endless void. Alex stumbled backwards, his heart pounding wildly again. He turned away from the window, but he couldn't escape that reflection. It was burned onto his retina like a photograph developed in acid. He blinked desperately, trying to banish the image, but it remained, lurking just at the edge of his vision, no matter where he looked. He needed to get out of here, away from these mirrors and reflections. But first, he had to find out what was happening, why this place felt so wrong. And there was only one way he knew how: by documenting everything, laying bare its secrets and cold, hard truth. With shaking hands, Alex raised his camera once more and began recording himself, talking through what had happened so far, describing every detail down to the last shattered pane of glass. He moved methodically around the room, capturing every angle, every potential clue. As he spoke, he felt a strange sensation growing within him. Not fear this time, but determination. This was his purpose here, his reason for being chosen by that mysterious caller. To bear witness, to shine a light into the darkness, and expose whatever lay hidden there. But as he finished recording himself, something occurred to him. Something so obvious it made him curse aloud. He had been so focused on documenting everything around him that he'd completely forgotten about one crucial detail: time. He checked his watch, then double-checked his camera's timestamp. According to the latter, only 5 minutes had passed since entering the apartment. But according to his watch, and his body's protesting aches and pains, hours must have gone by. How was that possible? How could so much time pass without him noticing? He racked his brain trying to remember any sign of it slipping away, a sudden chill, a shift in light, anything at all. But there was nothing, just that blank void where his memories should be. And then he noticed something else. The inscription on the mirror had changed. Before, it had simply read "mirror, mirror." Now, however, there were additional words scrawled beneath them, lines and lines of text filling every available inch of space like some insane person's manifesto. Mirror, mirror. Time runs thin here. Hours pass like minutes. Days stretch into years. Tick-tock, Alex Hartley. Are you listening? Are you watching? Who's behind the glass? Tick-tock, tick-tock. The words seemed to writhe on the page before him, crawling up his spine like 1,000 icy fingers. He stumbled backwards, his breath coming in ragged gasps now, as panic surged through him. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. And yet here it was, right there in front of him, proof that something unnatural was at work here. He had to get out, had to find help before he lost himself completely within this twisted place. But even as he turned towards the door, he knew it was too late, that once again, time had slipped away from him without notice. As he stepped into the hallway, Alex realized something else. He wasn't alone anymore. There were sounds coming from elsewhere in the apartment. Soft whispers and distant footsteps echoing through the walls, like ghosts walking unseen paths. And mixed in among them was another sound too, one that sent ice water rushing down his spine. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. Somewhere deep within this place, a clock was ticking away the seconds of his life, and with each passing moment, Alex felt himself coming unraveled, his sense of self fraying like an old rope worn thin by too much use. He tried to run then, fleeing down the hallway towards what he hoped was safety. But as he passed the bathroom door, it swung open suddenly, revealing a figure standing just inside, the woman from before. But now she was different somehow, changed. Her dress hung in rags around her emaciated frame. Her skin stretched tight over bones, like parchment pulled too thin. And those eyes, they were still black, but now they seemed to burn with an inner fire, boring into him as if trying to see clear through to his soul. "Who are you?" Alex gasped out, halting mid-stride as terror rooted him in place. The creature tilted her head slightly, regarding him with that same predatory intensity. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and whispered directly into his ear. "You know who I am." Her breath was cold against his skin, carrying with it the faintest hint of decay, like autumn leaves left too long on the ground. Alex shuddered involuntarily, trying to pull away from her touch, but it was as if he'd forgotten how to move, his limbs paralyzed by fear. "Remember me," she breathed again, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling every corner of the room nonetheless. "Remember us." And then she was gone, melting back into the shadows once more, while Alex stood there. Alex stood rooted in the hallway, the echo of that chilling whisper lingering like a stain upon his mind. His heart pounded against his ribcage, threatening to break free entirely as he struggled to regain control over his body. Slowly, painfully, he turned towards the now empty bathroom doorway, half expecting the creature to still be there, watching him with those hellish eyes. But she was gone, as if she'd never been at all. Only the faint scent of decay hung in the air, a ghostly reminder that something unnatural had just occurred. Tick-tock. The clock's rhythmic ticking seemed louder now, more insistent somehow. Alex felt its relentless march, like a physical pressure pushing down upon him. Each second counted away, stealing something vital from his grasp. He needed to do something, anything, before time slipped entirely beyond his reach. His gaze fell upon the camera hanging around his neck, forgotten in the chaos of his flight. It felt heavy suddenly, weighted with purpose. An idea began to take shape amidst the swirling panic within him. If he couldn't trust his own memories anymore, perhaps he could rely on something else instead. Something concrete and unyielding, immune to whatever games this place was playing. He would document everything, systematically, methodically. Alex returned to the bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if he were wading through deep water. The room seemed even more sinister now, shadows stretching out like welcoming arms, while the dim light flickered ominously overhead. He could almost feel eyes watching him from unseen corners, whispering encouragement or warning, he couldn't tell which. Setting up his tripod near the doorway, Alex positioned his camera so it pointed towards the bed and the window beyond. Then, taking a deep breath to steady himself, he stepped into frame and began speaking directly into its lens. "I'm not sure what's happening here," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I know something is wrong. Something unnatural." His reflection stared back at him from the camera display, eyes haunted by what he'd witnessed so far. "I think it wants me to remember something. Us, maybe." He paused then, considering his next words carefully. "And I think it's changing things around me too. Time, this place, my memories." Another breath, deeper this time, like a diver preparing for descent into unknown depths. "So I'm going to document everything, every detail. Maybe if I can capture it all on film, prove what's happening here, then someone else might be able to help me figure out why." Yeah? With that decided, Alex began methodically recording his surroundings. The cracked window pane with its distorted reflection, the marks leading from bed to window, now clearer under scrutiny, the dust thicker around them, almost as if they'd been drawn there deliberately. He moved slowly around the room, camera sweeping over every inch like a searchlight revealing hidden truths lurking just beyond perception. As he worked, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by unseen eyes or spectral presences, but rather by his own reflection. It followed him around the room, moving in perfect synchronization with his actions, yet somehow managing to convey an eerie independence nonetheless. Whenever he glanced at it, those black pupils seemed to bore right through him, holding him captive until he forced himself away again. Tick-tock. Each second counted away felt like another nail being driven into his coffin. But Alex refused to let fear control him anymore. Instead, he channeled it into focus, honing his resolve into a sharp blade that cut through the confusion and dread, threatening to consume him whole. He decided then that he would interview himself too, question his feelings, thoughts, observations aloud in hopes of triggering something. Anything that might help break this cycle. Setting up lights around the room to illuminate every shadow cast by the dying daylight outside, Alex placed himself back within the camera's frame and took a moment to collect his thoughts. "Alex," he began softly, addressing his reflection directly now. "Can you tell me what happened here?" His lips moved silently for a moment, before finally forming words hesitant at first, but growing steadier with each passing second. I don't know. Everything's so confusing." He paused, rubbing at his temples as if attempting to massage some coherence into his scattered thoughts. "I came here looking for answers about my past, but now it feels like this place is asking questions instead." "What kind of questions?" Alex prompted gently. His reflection considered him gravely before answering. "Who are we? Where did we come from? What brought us together?" "Why does that matter?" he asked next, leaning slightly closer to the camera as if seeking comfort in its unblinking gaze. "Because," his reflection whispered back, those cold black eyes holding him captive once more. "Without our past, how can we hope to have a future?" A chill ran down Alex's spine at those words, cold fingers tracing along every vertebrae like ice. Yet even as he shivered involuntarily, he felt something else too, a spark igniting deep within his chest, pushing back against the encroaching darkness around him. Tayo. No determination. He wouldn't let this place win without a fight. Not anymore. As Alex continued questioning himself, pushing harder now to uncover hidden truths beneath layers of confusion and fear, strange things began happening on camera. Static interference flickering across the display, distorted figures appearing momentarily in reflections before winking out again, voices murmuring just beyond comprehension. Each incident served only to strengthen his resolve, however. With each glimpsed figure or whispered word caught on film, Alex felt himself drawing closer to understanding what was truly happening here, as if reality itself were slowly being peeled back like skin from an onion, revealing something rotten at its core. Yet, even amidst the mounting evidence before him, a niggling doubt remained lodged firmly in the back of his mind. Because despite all he'd witnessed so far, despite the growing pile of proof gathering dust around him, there was still one question Alex couldn't answer. Why him? Why had this creature chosen him out of all possible victims? What made him special enough to warrant such sustained attention? And more importantly, perhaps, could he truly trust anything happening here when his own memories seemed so fragile, so easily manipulated? Tick-tock. The clock's relentless ticking grew louder still, pressing down upon Alex with ever-increasing urgency. He felt time slipping away from him like sand through fingers, each grain lost forever, stealing something vital from his grasp. Hope, perhaps, or sanity. But he refused to give up without a fight. Not yet. Not ever. So he kept questioning himself, kept pushing deeper into the abyss of uncertainty that had claimed him. And with each passing moment, Alex felt something else changing too. The apartment itself seemed to be evolving around him, shifting subtly but undeniably, as if responding directly to his actions. The dust grew thicker still, now coating every surface in a choking layer that made Alex's nose wrinkle in disgust whenever he breathed too deeply. Those strange marks leading from bed to window appeared more prominent somehow, darker almost, like wounds carved deliberately into the very fabric of reality itself. And yet, despite these disturbing changes wrought upon, Alex noticed something else too. The shadows in the apartment were lengthening, their edges sharpening into harsh angles that seemed to slice through the dim light filtering from outside. They clung to walls like spilled ink, pooling beneath furniture and creeping across floors with an almost sentient malevolence. It was as if night itself was encroaching earlier each day, eager to reclaim what it had lost during Alex's futile attempt at documentation. He found himself constantly adjusting the camera lens to combat this growing darkness. But even with increased brightness settings, footage remained grainy and indistinct. Perfect breeding ground for his imagination to run wild. Every flicker of static became a potential glimpse into something otherworldly. Every distorted figure, a new iteration of the creature haunting him. As days blurred into nights, so too did Alex's sense of self begin to fray at the edges. Time felt less like a linear progression than a relentless spiral, dragging him ever deeper into madness with each rotation. He'd wake from fitful sleep only to realize he couldn't remember whether it had been dawn or dusk when he'd finally succumbed to exhaustion. His watch face showed no signs of movement, its hands frozen in some eternal mid-afternoon. His camera battery, however, refused to die despite being perpetually plugged into the wall socket. Alex wondered if maybe time wasn't moving at all anymore. For him, anyway. Perhaps he was trapped here indefinitely, condemned to document his own descent into insanity until there was nothing left of him but empty flesh and hollow eyes. But even this terrifying thought couldn't shake loose the grip determination held on him. Instead, it fueled Alex further, spurring him onwards in pursuit of answers, despite the growing fear that he might not like what he found. Or worse, that he wouldn't understand it at all. He started noticing patterns within the chaos, recurring images appearing again and again across his footage, a single shadowy figure flickering briefly behind him while filming himself speaking directly into the lens, the same distorted reflection materializing in windows whenever he turned away from them, always just out of reach but close enough to make his skin crawl. There was something about those reflections, something familiar yet alien at once, like trying to recognize someone through a funhouse mirror, warped, twisted beyond recognition yet still undeniably them beneath all the distortion. Alex decided to focus on capturing these reflections perfectly. If he could just freeze frame one, perhaps then he'd finally understand what was happening here. Maybe even find some clue as to why this creature had singled him out specifically. But every attempt proved futile. No matter how many times he rewound tape or played back digital footage frame by frame, the reflection remained frustratingly elusive, sometimes too blurry for distinction, other times completely absent altogether despite having been clearly visible moments prior. It was as if whatever force controlled this creature also dictated what could be captured on film. Which begged another question. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just reveal itself outright instead of playing these constant games of hide and seek? Unless... Alex paused mid-thought, heart pounding loudly in his ears. Unless it didn't want him to see its true form. What if revealing itself would break whatever tenuous control it held over reality here? Over him? He felt a shiver run down his spine at the implications. Was he really trapped alone with something so powerful, so terrifyingly beyond comprehension, that even looking upon it directly could shatter reality itself? Then again, what choice did he have but to press on? To keep searching for answers despite the mounting evidence suggesting those very answers might destroy him? Tick-tock. The clock's ticking grew louder still, each passing second feeling heavier now, oppressive. Alex felt its relentless march bearing down upon him like a physical weight, threatening to crush him underfoot if he didn't find some way to halt it soon. So he continued questioning himself, continued probing the depths of this unnatural existence. And with each step further into madness, Alex began noticing strange things about his own reflection too. It seemed to change subtly between filming sessions, eyes darkening slightly, jawline sharpening ever so slightly, more pronounced frown lines creasing his forehead, when he wasn't frowning at all, as if something else was slowly taking root within him, growing stronger with each passing moment. Or maybe it wasn't his reflection changing, but rather Alex himself, who was shifting, fragmenting perhaps into multiple versions of himself, reflected back through time and space until nothing remained but chaos and confusion. He tried to dismiss these thoughts as paranoid delusions born from sleep deprivation and constant fear, but deep down, Alex knew there was something more, whispers of truth echoing up from the depths of his own shattered psyche. Because now, whenever he looked into that camera lens, Gazing back at him wasn't just a distorted figure or fleeting glimpse of some otherworldly creature. It was Alex too. Or rather, versions of him. Fractured, warped, twisted reflections reflecting back memories not quite his own. Echoes of experiences long forgotten yet strangely familiar nonetheless. Like glimpses into lives he'd once led but couldn't quite recall anymore. And among those faces, one seemed to stand out above all others, a young boy with wide eyes filled with terror staring back at Alex from beyond the glass barrier between them. Alex felt a jolt of recognition course through him at the sight. He knew that boy somehow, had seen him before. But where? When? Before he could dwell further on this disturbing revelation, however, something else caught his attention. Movement behind the child's reflection. A figure stepping out from shadows cast by an unseen light source, slowly approaching closer. Alex leaned in closer to the screen, breath held captive in his lungs as he strained to make out details of the approaching form. But just as it seemed about to step fully into view, the camera suddenly cut out, its lens fogging over completely despite being plugged into a power source mere inches away. Panicked, Alex reached for the camera's reset button but found himself hesitating instead. What if whatever caused this malfunction was still there, still watching him? He glanced up from the camera display towards his own reflection in the blackened screen before him, and froze. The figure standing behind the boy wasn't a stranger after all. It was Alex himself, older maybe, but unmistakably him nonetheless. Only instead of the camera lens reflecting back his familiar face now, there was nothing but empty darkness where his eyes should have been. Tick-tock. Time seemed to stretch out around Alex then, each passing second feeling like an eternity as he stared into that abyss, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could he possibly be seeing such impossible things? And then it struck him. Perhaps he wasn't seeing them at all. Perhaps these weren't reflections of reality but instead projections from his own mind. Manifestations born from trauma buried deep within his subconscious waiting to be unearthed. Or worse still, maybe this was something entirely different altogether. Something far more sinister and terrifying than anything Alex could have imagined possible. Because now whenever he looked into that camera lens, gazing back at him wasn't just a distorted figure or a fleeting glimpse of some otherworldly creature. Alex tore his gaze away from the abyss that was once his reflection, heart pounding wildly against his ribs like a trapped animal desperate for escape. He stumbled back from the desk, knocking over the chair in his haste to put some distance between himself and whatever had just happened. But there was no escape, not really. The creature, if indeed it could be called such, lived within him now, a malevolent shadow cast upon his own soul. And it was growing stronger, feeding off his fear and confusion like some insatiable beast. He paced the length of the apartment, hands clawing at his hair as he struggled to make sense of what he'd seen. Was this all just some elaborate hallucination? A grotesque manifestation of his own fragmented psyche? Or was something else at work here? Something far beyond his comprehension or control? Alex paused by the window, staring out into the seemingly endless night that had descended upon the city. No stars twinkled back at him tonight. Instead, it was as if even the heavens themselves had turned their backs on him, leaving him stranded in this waking nightmare alone. He needed answers, needed to understand what was happening before he lost himself completely within these twisted reflections. But how could he hope to grasp something so utterly alien and terrifying? An idea struck him then, born out of desperation more than anything else. Perhaps if he could capture one of these apparitions perfectly, freeze it in time on camera, then maybe, just maybe, he'd finally have some solid evidence to work with. Something tangible he could analyze, dissect. And so, with a sense of grim determination, Alex set about preparing for another round of filming. He cleared the living room completely, removing all furniture save for one lone chair positioned precisely at its center. Then he situated his camera directly across from it, ensuring the shot framed nothing but empty space around that single piece of furniture. Next came the lighting. Alex wanted no shadows cast tonight. Every inch of that room must be bathed in harsh artificial light if he hoped to capture even a fraction of what awaited him there. He positioned 2 floor lamps on either side of the chair, their combined glow illuminating the area like some makeshift spotlight stage. Finally, he took up residence behind the camera, eyes glued to the viewfinder as he waited for his unseen visitor to arrive. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slow, each one stretching out longer than the last, until Alex felt certain time itself had ground to a halt around him. And then, finally, after what seemed like hours of interminable waiting, something began to happen. At first, it was little more than a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a slight ripple of distortion within the frame that might have been dismissed as nothing more than a trick of the light under different circumstances. But Alex knew better now. He'd seen enough to recognize when his otherworldly guest had entered the room. He held his breath, fingers trembling slightly on the zoom control as he slowly tightened the shot around the chair. The disturbance grew more pronounced with each passing second, writhing like smoke caught within an invisible container, before solidifying suddenly into a shape all too familiar now, that of Alex himself. Or at least, what appeared to be Alex. For though this figure bore his likeness, there was something distinctly wrong about it. Its movements were jerky, disjointed almost, as if marionette strings controlled its limbs rather than any voluntary muscle action. And its eyes, those empty black orbs, seemed to stare directly into the camera now, accusing Alex of some unknown sin committed against them both. Alex forced himself to remain still, barely daring to breathe lest he scare off this apparition before it had fully manifested itself. He watched, hypnotized almost, as the figure took a single halting step forward. Then another. And another still, until finally, it stood mere inches from where Alex knew his own reflection should be. Then came a voice, thin and reedy, yet filled with an otherworldly power that seemed to reverberate through every fiber of Alex's being. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, each word sending shivers down his spine like ice-cold fingers tracing along his vertebrae. "But now that you have, there's no going back." A cold sweat broke out across Alex's forehead despite the stifling heat within the room. He wanted to reply, wanted to demand answers from this creature masquerading as him, but found himself unable to speak past the lump of terror lodged in his throat. Instead, he watched helplessly as the figure reached out towards the camera lens, its long-nailed fingertips brushing against the glass with a sound like nails on chalkboard. Then those dark eyes seemed to bore right into Alex's own soul, piercing him with an intense scrutiny that felt almost physical in nature. "You're one of us now," it hissed at last, before turning away and beginning to walk back towards the shadows from whence it came. "Welcome home." And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the apparition was gone, leaving nothing behind but empty space and Alex's own ragged breath echoing hollowly within the silence. He staggered backwards, away from the camera, hands shaking violently as he fumbled for the playback button. The footage loaded onto the screen, revealing a perfectly captured image of his reflection, standing before the chair, only to shatter suddenly into 1,000 fragmented pieces mere seconds later. Alex slumped against the wall behind him, knees buckling beneath him as reality finally sank in. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just happening to him anymore. No, now he was a part of it too. An active participant in this twisted dance between man and monster. And there would be no escape until one of them lay broken beyond repair at the other's feet. The days that followed passed in a blur for Alex. Each morning when he woke, if indeed sleep had claimed him at all during those endless nights, he found himself surrounded by new terrors born from his own imagination run amok. Shadows seemed to lurk around every corner, their forms shifting menacingly whenever he glanced their way. Whispers echoed through the apartment at all hours, growing louder and more insistent until Alex could bear it no longer and threw himself against the walls, screaming for silence, only to find that the voices came from within him now too. He tried to eat, knowing that his body needed fuel if he hoped to keep fighting whatever was happening here. But food tasted like ash on his tongue, each bite difficult to swallow past the lump of dread lodged in his throat. Instead, he found himself craving something far more sinister, the sweet, intoxicating taste of fear. And so began Alex's descent into madness proper. He spent hours upon hours watching his own reflections, searching for any sign that the creature might still be there waiting for him, just beyond the glass barrier between them. When none came, he took to provoking it instead, taunting it with words designed to draw it out from whatever shadows it hid within. "You're weak," he'd spit at his reflection, watching as those dark eyes seemed to smolder in response. "You can't hurt me." The creature would growl then, a low menacing sound that sent shivers. Alex continued his descent into obsession, each day blurring into the next as he hunted for any sign of the creature in his reflection. His once orderly apartment now bore the marks of his desperation, clothing strewn across chairs, dishes piled high in the sink, and empty bottles scattered like forgotten sentinels around the room. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale coffee and something else. Something foul that seemed to cling to Alex's skin like a second shadow. One evening, as he sat before his camera preparing yet another attempt to capture the creature on film, Alex noticed something strange. Among the clutter on the table lay a small pile of photographs, their corners worn soft from years of being handled. He picked them up, frowning at the familiar images, himself at various ages, smiling back at him through the glassine surface. But there was one photo he didn't recognize. It showed Alex standing in his living room, surrounded by equipment similar to what he used now. Behind him, the camera captured a reflection of another figure standing just out of frame, its form blurred and distorted as if struggling against the laws of optics. A cold chill ran down Alex's spine despite the stifling heat of the apartment. He turned the photo over, hoping for some clue as to where it had come from. But there was nothing except a faded timestamp. 3:14 a.m. That was odd. He couldn't remember ever taking a photograph at that hour, or even owning such old equipment. The style of the print itself seemed outdated too, like something from another era entirely. Alex set the photo down carefully, his mind racing with questions. Had he taken it himself during one of his blackouts? Or was there someone else here with him, hidden in the shadows of his apartment? Before he could ponder further, a noise caught his attention. A soft, shuffling sound coming from somewhere deep within the darkness that had begun to creep into every corner of his home. He turned slowly towards it, eyes scanning the gloom until they found its source, something moving beneath the bedsheets in his bedroom. His heart pounded wildly against his ribs as Alex approached the bedside table, fingers brushing against the cold metal of a lamp he'd left unplugged there days ago. He grabbed hold of the cord, jerking it sharply upwards to send electricity coursing through the bulb. Light exploded into being, casting away the shadows and revealing nothing. The bed remained untouched, its sheets smooth and pristine, save for a single, perfectly placed crease down the center where Alex had left them earlier that morning. Yet still he could feel it, like an itch beneath his skin. Something was wrong here, out of place in this sterile tableau of order. It wasn't until he stepped back toward the doorway that Alex realized what had changed. The door itself was now closed tight against him, its once familiar creak now silent as death. He reached out tentatively, fingers brushing against the cold metal handle before wrenching it downwards with a desperation born of pure terror. But no matter how hard he pulled, the door refused to budge, held fast by some unseen force on the other side. Panic surged through him then, threatening to drown out rational thought altogether as Alex threw himself against the barrier again and again, until his forehead split open against its unyielding surface, painting the wood red with blood. Just when he felt on the brink of collapse, a noise floated up from behind him, the faintest whisper of movement, barely audible over the roaring in his ears. He spun around, eyes wide with fear and adrenaline, to find that the shadow had moved again. Now it seemed to pool beneath the bedroom door opposite, seeping through the crack at its base like dark oil spilled upon the floor. Alex stumbled backwards, away from whatever horrors lay beyond that threshold, until his back pressed against the wall beside him. There he slid downwards, hands clutching at his face as if attempting to hold himself together physically while his mind shattered into 1,000 fragments around him. Time passed without measure then, each second stretching out into eternity, as Alex huddled there in terror, waiting for whatever was coming next. Hours might have gone by before he finally felt strong enough to rise once more, but when he did, it was with renewed determination, burning brightly within his chest. He would not be a victim here, cowering in corners while something else pulled the strings of his life. No, if this creature wanted him, then Alex would face it head-on, armed with knowledge and defiance instead of fear. First things first, he needed answers, and there was one place he knew where those might be found, hidden deep within the recesses of his own memories. If only he could reach them. Alex crossed the room slowly, each step measured against the silent ticking of an unseen clock. When he reached the table where the photo still lay scattered among its brethren, he snatched it up greedily, fingers tracing over the blurred figure in the reflection once more. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to echo throughout his entire being, Alex plunged himself back into the darkness, seeking out those long-buried recollections of the past. And this time, he would not let them slip away so easily. Alex stood in his living room, the photograph clutched tightly in one hand while he balanced precariously on a ladder with the other. He'd spent hours setting up cameras throughout his apartment, tiny black eyes watching from every angle, each lens pointed towards potential ingress points for whatever had been haunting him. But now, as he reached high to affix another device near the ceiling, doubt gnawed at him like a rat chewing through cable insulation. The room felt different today, heavier somehow, as if the very air was conspiring against him. Or perhaps it was merely his imagination playing tricks again, whispering lies into his ear while that thing skulked unseen behind reality's curtain. He paused, mid-reach, and glanced around warily before shaking off the sensation with a grimace. But when he turned back to his task, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement on the wall opposite. It was barely perceptible, just a shimmering distortion like heat haze rippling across stone. Alex blinked, squinting harder at the spot even as it seemed to fade away into nothingness once more. Just my imagination, he muttered under his breath, trying desperately to convince himself despite the cold tendrils of dread coiling around his spine. Yet still, he couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right here, that perhaps this place held secrets even darker than those he'd already uncovered. With renewed urgency, Alex scrambled up the ladder once more, securing the final camera with quick, precise movements before descending back to solid ground. As his feet touched down on the worn carpet, he felt it again, that same creeping sensation of being watched, studied almost, by unseen eyes lurking just beyond his field of vision. He wheeled around sharply, heart pounding in his chest like a trapped animal's, only to find empty space mocking him once more. There was nothing there, no monster crouched ready to pounce, no spectral figure looming menacingly from the shadows. Just more of that oppressive emptiness which seemed intent on driving him mad with its silence. But then, Alex remembered something, a detail so small he'd almost overlooked it entirely until now. Something about one of those seemingly innocuous photographs scattered across his table downstairs. He hurried down the stairs, each footfall echoing loudly through the apartment as if announcing his arrival to whatever waited below. When he reached the table, he searched frantically amongst the scattered prints until finally, there it was, the picture taken from outside his bedroom window at precisely 3:14 a.m. Only this time, instead of focusing on the blurred figure reflected behind him in the glass, Alex found himself drawn inexorably towards something else entirely. Something he hadn't noticed before, but which now seemed glaringly obvious once pointed out by his own mind's eye. The angle of the reflection itself. Because it shouldn't be like that. Not if he'd taken the photograph standing directly outside his bedroom door, as he remembered doing. No, the reflected image should have been higher up on the glass, nearer to where his head would have been at eye-level height. But instead, it was lower down, almost level with his chest. Just about where a camera lens might be positioned or someone holding it there, perhaps crouched or even lying prone on the ground outside. A cold chill ran through Alex then, raising goosebumps along his arms despite the stifling heat within his apartment. He stepped back from the table, gaze still locked onto that damned photograph, feeling as though he'd been physically struck by some unseen force. Because if his memories were correct, and God knows they felt far from reliable these days, then someone else must have taken that picture. Someone who had been positioned directly below him while Alex stood there, oblivious to their presence, until now. Alex tore himself away from the table, pacing back and forth across the living room like a caged animal as he tried desperately to make sense of what this revelation meant. If his memories were wrong about such a seemingly insignificant detail, could they be deceiving him in other ways too? He thought back over recent events, each one now tainted by doubt and suspicion. Had he truly heard noises coming from his bedroom that night? Or had those sounds simply been the product of his own fraying nerves? And what of the door slamming shut behind him, locking him inside with such brutal force? Could he really trust his recollections when even something as concrete as a photograph appeared to contradict them? Paranoia gnawed at him then, burrowing deep into his psyche like a ravenous worm eating away at flesh until there was nothing left but bone and madness. He felt himself teetering on the edge of some vast precipice, one wrong step away from tumbling headlong into the abyss below. Yet still, amidst all this chaos and confusion, something else remained constant. That nagging feeling of unease which seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment, as if his apartment itself was alive somehow, whispering warnings meant only for him while it watched through countless unseen eyes. Alex paused mid-stride, suddenly aware of just how utterly alone he was here. There were no neighbors nearby, no friends or family close enough to call upon should something go terribly wrong. Just him and whatever else might be lurking within these four walls, hidden behind closed doors or crouched silently in the shadows. A sudden noise from upstairs startled him, a soft thud followed by what sounded like cautious footsteps padding back and forth across the bedroom floor above his head. He froze, heart hammering wildly against his ribcage as he listened intently, willing himself to hear more over the roaring in his ears. When it came again, barely audible but unmistakable nonetheless, Alex knew with a chilling certainty that something was up there with him. Something which had no business being anywhere near his home, let alone prowling around freely whilst he stood helpless below. And then, without warning, all sound ceased abruptly once more, as if whatever had made those noises was now aware of Alex's presence too, waiting silently in the darkness until he either came to investigate or else fled screaming into the night. But flight was not an option, not anymore. Not when Alex had come so close to unraveling this mystery at last, piecing together fragments of truth amidst all the lies and deceit. No, he would face whatever awaited him upstairs, armed with knowledge and defiance instead of fear. Because if there was one thing Alex knew for certain now, it was that this creature, whatever form it took, could not be allowed to continue unchecked any longer. Not while he still drew breath within these haunted walls. He moved towards the staircase, each step measured against the silent ticking of an unseen clock. When he reached the top, he paused briefly before continuing on down the dimly lit hallway, eyes scanning left and right as if expecting some unseen threat to leap out at any moment. But none came, leaving Alex to approach his bedroom door feeling almost foolish for having been so easily spooked earlier. Perhaps it had merely been a trick of the light after all, he told himself, or perhaps even just his imagination playing more of its cruel. Alex pushed open his bedroom door, the hinge creaking softly in protest as it swung inward to reveal a room bathed in the sickly glow of moonlight filtering through partially drawn curtains. His eyes darted around the space, taking in every shadow and corner with practiced precision before settling on the bed, neatly made despite the turmoil of recent nights. Nothing seemed amiss at first glance, yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like a faint whisper at the edge of his consciousness begging for acknowledgement. He stepped inside, allowing the door to click shut behind him as he reached out instinctively for the light switch. But before he could flick it on, a sudden movement caught his eye, a flash of something pale darting across the wall opposite, vanishing into the gloom before he could even register what it was. His heart lurched in response, pounding wildly against his ribs as every muscle tensed, ready to flee or fight whichever threat might reveal itself next. Yet stillness returned once more, mocking him with its emptiness. Alex stood there frozen, breaths coming in short, sharp gasps while he waited for something, anything, to happen again. When after several interminable minutes nothing did, he slowly exhaled and shook his head, admonishing himself silently for letting fear get the better of him once more. "Enough," he muttered under his breath, turning back towards the light switch only to find it no longer worked when he flipped it up and down several times. "Great," he muttered darkly, pulling out his phone instead and using its flashlight function to illuminate the room properly for the first time since entering. The beam cut through the darkness like a blade, revealing every detail with harsh precision. And that was when Alex noticed it, a faint disturbance in the otherwise pristine arrangement of photographs scattered across his desk, as if someone had been rifling through them moments before he arrived. He approached cautiously, eyes scanning each image in turn, until they came to rest upon one particular photograph, tucked away behind others, an old Polaroid from his childhood, yellowed with age and slightly out of focus. In it, young Alex smiled tentatively at the camera, while behind him, half obscured by shadow, something else loomed large and indistinct. Alex had seen this photo countless times before, yet now there was something new about it, a subtle alteration that sent a shiver down his spine despite himself. He leaned closer, squinting against the harsh glare of his phone's light as he tried to make out what exactly had changed. And then he saw it, a faint but unmistakable smudge across the surface of the Polaroid, like someone had taken a finger or thumb and dragged it roughly along the photograph, marring its surface with a thin line of darkness. As Alex traced this mark with his fingertip, he felt a sickening lurch in his gut as he realized what he was looking at, an impression left behind by human skin, perfectly capturing the whorls and lines unique to each individual's fingerprint. His own fingerprint. A cold sweat broke out across Alex's forehead as panic began to rise within him, threatening to overwhelm all rational thought. How could this be? When had he touched this photograph last? And why couldn't he remember doing so? More questions tumbled through his mind, each one more terrifying than the last, until finally they coalesced into a single, horrifying realization. His memories were wrong. They had to be. With shaking hands, Alex set down his phone and reached for the photo album where he kept all his old photographs, those taken before everything went wrong, when life was still simple and safe. He flipped through its pages quickly, searching for any sign of tampering or alteration, but found nothing out of place until he reached the final section dedicated to images from his teenage years. There it was again, another Polaroid, this one showing Alex laughing with friends at some long-forgotten party, yet marred by the same dark smudge across its surface. And beneath that, another altered photograph after another, each one bearing evidence of Alex's own fingerprint, despite knowing full well he hadn't handled these pictures in years. His breath hitched in his throat as he turned to the next page, then the next, until finally he found what he'd been dreading most, an entire section devoted solely to photographs of himself at various ages, all showing signs of distress or terror. Each one bore the same telltale mark, Alex's own fingerprint, along with other disturbing alterations designed specifically to invoke fear and unease. In some, his eyes had been blacked out entirely. In others, his mouth was stretched into a silent scream while unseen hands seemed to reach out from behind him, threatening to drag him back into darkness. There were even images where Alex himself appeared distorted somehow, features warped beyond recognition as if viewed through fractured glass or warped mirror. As he stared at these twisted reflections of his own life, something inside Alex snapped. The last vestiges of denial crumbled away, leaving behind a cold, hard truth. His memories had been edited, damaged, replaced by someone, something, intent on driving him mad with fear and confusion. And suddenly, everything made sense. Or rather, it didn't make sense at all anymore. Because if Alex couldn't trust his own memories, then how could he trust anything else? How could he know what was real and what wasn't? He stumbled backwards, nearly falling over as he tried to put some distance between himself and the horrifying evidence laid bare before him. His heart felt like it might explode within his chest, pounding wildly against his ribs, while a high-pitched whine filled his ears, drowning out all other sound. Then, just when Alex thought he couldn't possibly take any more, something moved in the corner of his eye, a fleeting glimpse of pale flesh and dark shadow darting across the room once again. This time, however, there was no mistaking its origin. The reflection in his bedroom mirror had shifted slightly, revealing a distorted figure standing just behind him, close enough to reach out and touch, if only he dared turn around. But Alex didn't dare. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by terror as he stared at their reflection together. Himself and this other thing, bound together in twisted unity like some grotesque Siamese twins. And then, slowly but inexorably, the creature began to change once more, its form warping and twisting until it bore an uncanny resemblance to Alex himself. Except for the eyes. Those remained dark pits of nothingness, devoid of all humanity or empathy, staring back at him with a predatory hunger that seemed to grow stronger by the moment. As if sensing his growing despair, the creature reached out one long-fingered hand and pressed it flat against the mirror's surface, tracing the lines of Alex's reflection with careful precision. And then, without warning, it began to speak, not aloud but rather directly into Alex's mind, its voice like ice shards piercing deep within his skull. "You can't fight me," it whispered. "Not anymore." Alex staggered back, hands clapped over ears, as if that could somehow block out this invasive intrusion upon his thoughts. But there was no escape. Alex stood frozen in his bedroom, the creature's voice echoing like thunder inside his skull. "You can't fight me." Its reflection hovered behind him in the mirror, eyes black voids promising endless torment. Fear gripped Alex, a primal terror that paralyzed his limbs and clawed at his heart. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Anger. This thing had invaded his life, twisted his memories, fed on his uncertainty. It had taken everything from him, leaving only doubt and despair. And now it wanted to claim his sanity too? Not if he could help it. With a roar born of desperation, Alex spun around, facing the creature head-on. Its reflection shifted, mirroring his movement with a mocking grace that set Alex's teeth on edge. But he refused to look away, meeting those empty black eyes with defiance blazing in his own. "You're wrong," he snarled. "I won't let you win." The creature tilted its head, an eerie mimicry of curiosity. "Win?" it echoed, voice like grinding glass. "There is no winning here, Alexander, only survival." "And what about you?" Alex challenged. "What are you surviving for?" A pause, then a cold laugh reverberated through his mind. "Fear," the creature whispered. "Uncertainty, I feed on them." Revulsion surged through Alex. He felt sickened by the thought of being hunted like prey, manipulated into feeding this monstrosity with his own fears. "Not anymore," he growled. "I'm not going to be your puppet any longer." He lunged forward, hands outstretched as if to grab the creature by its throat. But his fingers passed through empty air. There was nothing tangible to grasp except perhaps his own reflection. Undeterred, Alex slammed his fists against the mirror, causing it to crack spiderweb patterns across its surface. The creature reacted instantly, howling in fury as it pressed itself harder against the broken glass. Its form shimmered, began to bleed through like ink stains on wet paper. Panic surged within Alex. He couldn't let this thing escape into his reality again. With renewed determination, he clawed at the cracked mirror, tearing away shards of glass until there was nothing left but bare wall. But even as he worked, he knew it wouldn't be enough. This creature wasn't confined by mere physical barriers. It had proven that time and again. So what could stop it? What weapon could possibly harm something that didn't truly exist except in reflection and recording? Alex's breath caught as an idea took shape in his mind. It was risky, insane even, but he had nothing left to lose. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the Polaroid photo, the one with his fingerprints smudged across it. "You want fear?" he whispered, turning back to face the creature. "I'll give you fear." He held up the photo, letting the creature see its own distorted reflection within the cracked surface of the mirror. Then, before doubt could change his mind, Alex set fire to the corner of the photograph using his lighter. Flames licked at the edges, blackening the paper as they crept towards the creature's image. It screamed, a sound like shattering glass that echoed through Alex's mind like physical pain. He cried out too, collapsing to his knees as agony racked his body. But he didn't drop the burning photograph. Instead, he pressed it harder against the mirror, holding it there until nothing remained but ash and charred remnants. When finally, mercifully, silence fell, Alex slumped forward, exhaustion threatening to drag him under. But he forced himself back up, staring at the now empty wall where once the creature had stood. Had he done it? Had he truly banished this horror from his life? Suddenly, laughter echoed through the room, cold, cruel, and all too familiar. Alex spun around, eyes wide with disbelief as he saw another reflection appear on the bedroom window, the creature laughing at him. "You think you've won?" it taunted, voice barely audible over the pounding of Alex's heart. "You cannot destroy me so easily, Alexander." Fear clutched Alex's chest like a physical vice. He tried to move, to run, but his limbs refused to obey. Helplessness welled up within him, drowning out hope and leaving only despair. Then, just as suddenly, the creature's laughter stopped. Its reflection began to warp and twist once more, growing larger, darker, until it filled every inch of the window frame. And then, with one final scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of Alex's sanity, it lunged forward, not out of the mirror this time, but directly into his mind. Darkness claimed Alex, consuming everything in its path. The last thing he saw was his own reflection shattering into a million pieces, before everything went black. And somewhere in that darkness, something whispered, "It's not over yet." Alex stumbled through his front door, his body heavy, and his mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. He'd left apartment 7 behind, but the echoes of what had happened lingered like shadows clinging to his skin. His hands trembled as he flicked on the light switch in his living room, revealing the familiar space that now felt alien and unwelcoming. A framed photograph caught his eye, a snapshot from his childhood yellowed with age. He picked it up, his heart pounding as he recognized himself standing in front of a building, grinning at the camera. And then he saw it, the address plaque beside the door. Apartment 7. Memories flashed through his mind like strobe lights, fragments of forgotten moments, glimpses of horrors witnessed but suppressed. The creature's reflection in the classroom window, its laughter echoing down the school hallway, and him, Alex, always him, chasing after it, feeding it fear without even knowing why. His stomach churned as realization dawned. He'd been its pawn all along. Its obsession had never been with apartment 7. It was him. It was always him. A soft knock at his door snapped Alex back to reality. He hesitated before answering, fear coiling around his spine like a serpent. But he knew who stood on the other side of that door. Knew because now he remembered everything. He opened the door to reveal Mrs. Hargrove from across the hall, her kind eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right, Alex? I heard some noises coming from your apartment." Alex forced a smile, but it felt like a grimace. "I'm fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, louder, more confident. "Actually, Mrs. Hargrove, would you like to come in for some tea?" As she stepped inside, Alex closed the door behind her, sealing them both off from the world outside. The creature might have won this round, but it had underestimated him once before. And now that he knew the truth, the cycle began again. And this time, Alex was ready. Alex stood over Mrs. Hargrove's lifeless body, his breath ragged and hands shaking. He'd done what he had to do. She was another pawn in this endless game, just like him, just like everyone else. As if on cue, the creature appeared in the mirror across from him, its reflection warping and twisting until it filled every inch of the glass. Alex steeled himself, preparing for another confrontation, but the creature did something unexpected. It laughed. "You think you've ended it?" it taunted, voice like grinding glass. "You cannot escape me, Alexander. Not ever." Alex frowned, confusion momentarily overriding his fear. "What do you mean?" The creature leaned closer to the mirror, its reflection growing clearer, more defined. It looked younger, familiar, because it whispered, "I am you." Horror gripped Alex like a physical vice. He stumbled back, shock coursing through him as he stared at the reflection that now mirrored his own face perfectly. The creature was him, had always been him. His own mind had birthed this horror, feeding it fear and uncertainty until it grew strong enough to manifest physically. Memories surged forth, overwhelming him. Every time he chased after the creature's reflection, it had led him back here, back to this apartment, back to himself. He'd been playing a game with his own sanity, and now he understood why it seemed impossible to win. "There is no escape," the reflection whispered, voice echoing in Alex's mind. "Not for you, not for anyone." Alex shook his head, denial rising within him like bile. "No," he gasped. "That can't be true." "It is true." The reflection smiled sadly. "And now you know why it will never end. Because I am you, Alexander, and you are me." As the creature's laughter filled the room once more, Alex collapsed to his knees, despair drowning out everything else. He'd been wrong about so much. About the creature, about himself, even about the ending. But most importantly, he realized too late. He'd been wrong about remembering. Because now that he knew the truth, there was no escape from the endless cycle of fear and uncertainty that had always been his reality. And as darkness claimed him once more, Alex's final thought echoed through the empty apartment like a haunting refrain. "It will never end."